The study session for the Aurora City Council for Monday, August 12, 2024 is called to order. Will the clerk please call the roll?
Mayor Kaufman.
Here.
Councilmember Bergen. Here. Councilmember Coombs. Councilmember Gardner.
Here.
Councilmember Hancock.
Here.
Councilmember Drinsky.
Here.
Councilmember Lawson.
Here.
Councilmember Medina.
Here.
Councilmember Murillo.
Present.
Councilmember Sundberg.
Here.
Mayor Pro Tem Zvanek.
Here.
Is there, there's no mayor update. Are there any issue updates? Seeing none, is there any objection for moving the consent calendar forward? Item number 2A through 2L. Seeing none, consent calendar will move forward. Items from the Policy Committee, 3A, Aurora Election Code Update. Katie Rodriguez, City Clerk.
Mayor and council members, this ordinance is to update the current election code. The election code is in Chapter 54, and it's made up of different articles. 3 of the articles are citizen-initiated petition requirements, and 1 of the articles is dedicated to campaign finance requirements. There's structural and procedural inconsistencies within this chapter that prompted a review and the following recommendations so that the code can be more user-friendly for residents and staff. The first recommendation is related to citizen-initiated petitions. The current requirements and processes used by citizens are not consistent within the 3 articles for citizen-initiated petitions. There's no basis for the differences, and the inconsistencies make it confusing for citizens to comply with and for staff to implement. We recommend that individualized petition requirements be removed from each article and consolidated into 1 new article. This new article will be where residents can easily find all petition requirements. We also recommend updating certain portions of the code to comply with the charter and state law. The new article will include the following: petition formats, signature requirements and withdrawal of signature process, initial determination of sufficiency, ballot title and submission clause, presentation to council, and unlawful acts. So we are proposing the following changes within this new article. Allow the city clerk to provide the form of the petition. This ensures that the form of the petition is standardized and includes all the required elements. Amend the protest deadline to 30 days instead of 20 days after the initial determination of sufficiency is issued. Allow the city clerk to appoint a hearing officer for protest hearings. In the current code, the city clerk is the hearing officer for all protests regarding initial determination of sufficiency. Allow the city clerk or appointed hearing officer to administer oaths for protest hearings to reduce cost. The current code requires a certified court reporter to administer these oaths. Allow protest hearings to be set as soon as 5 days instead of 10 after the date of the hearing notice is sent. This reduces the wait time for a public hearing and allows the process to move forward in a timely manner. Allow registered electors to remove their signatures from a petition by filing a written request with the city clerk. Previously, petition signers would have to file a formal protest and go through a hearing process. Allow any registered elector, not just the petition representatives, to submit a protest to the clerk regarding ballot title and submission clause. The current code only allows petition representatives to protest the ballot title or submission clause, requiring registered electors to go through district court. And these are the proposed updates to the existing article. Add that recall petitions cannot be circulated if the office is up for re-election within 6 months. Add the requirement that signed recall petitions must be filed with the city clerk no later than 60 days from the date the petition form was approved. The current code does not specify the length of time for circulation, and this date actually mimics state code as well. Make the code consistent with the charter by changing the date for a recall election to be held within 90 days instead of 120 days of the date the final determination is issued. And for charter amendments, require petition for a charter amendment initiative ordinance to be filed with the city clerk no later than 90 days instead of 120 from the date the petition form was approved. This also mimics state statute. So this would be the proposed processes for initiatives, referendums, and charter amendment petitions. The petition representatives would submit their statement of intent. The city clerk would issue a determination as to whether the proposal meets municipal legislation and single subject requirements and prepares the summary for the petition. The petition format is provided to the petition representatives for circulation. Once that is turned into the city clerk's office, we review the submitted petition sections and issue a written determination reflecting whether the petition contains the required number of signatures. And then we also will work with other city officials to set the ballot title and submission clause. The final determination of sufficiency will be issued following the passage of the protest period, and then the petition and determination is presented to City Council. For recall petitions, the petition representatives will file their statement of no more than 200 words stating the reason for the recall. The city clerk will notify the council member, and the council member may file a statement of no more than 500 words in response. The city clerk will then issue determination as to whether the proposal meets all municipal legislation and single subject requirements. The city clerk will provide the final petition form to the petition representatives for circulation, which will include the reason for recall and the response from the council member. City clerk will review each submitted petition section and issue a written determination reflecting whether the petition contains the required number of signatures. And then we will set the ballot title and submission clause, issue the final determination of sufficiency following the passage of the protest period, and then present the petition to City Council. I was one slide behind, I'm sorry. Okay, so the second change we are recommending pertains to campaign finance. Many definitions used only for campaign finance are mixed in with the definitions applicable to the entire chapter, and this really makes it very cumbersome. We recommend moving the campaign finance definitions from Article 1 to Article 4, which is campaign finance article. And this is the only change recommended to this part of the chapter at this time. And that is all I have, and council has any questions?
Questions for our city clerk? Councilmember Bergen.
Thank you for the presentation. On the campaign finance definitions, we're still staying with that, the new software, I can't remember what it's called.
Civics, yes.
And there was some kind of ambiguity on some of the terms in terms of what, you know, if it was I can't remember now, if it was a contribution from a corporate organization or.
There was a court decision that came out that went against what our code was. So City Council actually did update it. And then after this change to the chapter, the City Clerk's office and City Attorney's office would like to look at clarifying those definitions. We just wanted to first focus on citizen-initiated petitions and then campaign finance.
Thank you.
Further questions or comments? Seeing none, is there any opposition to moving 3A forward? Seeing no opposition, 3A will move forward. 3B, plan presentation, transitioning domestic violence cases out of the municipal court. Councilmember Zvonek.
So,
Well, Mayor Pro Tem Zvonek, stand correction.
is there, is somebody do the presentation that we walked through?
Yes.
Yeah.
So if you want us to do the presentation first.
Yeah, if we could do that, and I'll just tee this up. When we talked about this maybe 6 weeks ago-ish, we asked staff to reach out to stakeholders and come back to us with what a plan could look like that would have a transition date of January 1st of next year. And based on that, and remember, when we set that deadline, there was a lot of discussion between Councilmember Coombs and I about why that date. And it was really just to put a date out there and recognizing that it might have to shift one way or the other. But that being said, it sounds like a lot of, and I thank you to staff, because I've been keeping up on the conversations. A lot of stakeholders were involved and had some, I think, constructive feedback about what it would look like and some of the challenges for the transition. So with that, I'll hand it over to Judge Day.
Okay, thank you. Thank you, Mayor and members of council. Thank you, Councilmember, or Mayor Pro Tem Zonic, for teeing it up. I'd also like to thank Candace Atkinson, our court administrator, and her team for putting together the backup and the presentation for you tonight. She couldn't be here. She's out of town. But I just wanted to say thank you for her help in putting this together. Next slide, please. As council knows, there was a resolution, just as Mayor Pro Tem referenced, that council passed that directed the city manager, the city attorney, the court administrator, and myself to collaborate with key stakeholders, and that included both the police department, the 17th and 18th JD, the Public Defender Commission, and we were to develop a transition of domestic violence cases out of the municipal court. We did that. We reached out to all stakeholders and conducted 2 meetings with all stakeholders. Next slide, please. You'll see when we get to another slide who was present at those meetings and the dates of those meetings. But one of the things that we wanted to provide council is to give you an idea of what we're looking at in the way of current cases and what data we could pull as it relates to what we currently have, which helps us develop the transition plan. Currently, we have 2,404 open domestic violence cases, and that includes 1,024 active domestic violence warrants. We broke up the warrants as well. There's 610 warrants for failure to appear. That means that somebody has actually been contacted by the police, served with the summons and complaint, arrested for the charges, and then subsequently failed to appear at another court date. There's 424 current probable cause warrants. Probable cause warrants are where an officer, after investigation, will come before the court, request a warrant issued for the person. They have not had contact with the person. They just submit the paperwork for judicial review. After a determination that probable cause exists, the judge will sign the probable cause warrant. And so those people have not been contacted yet by the Aurora Police Department. They're still waiting to be contacted. So those are the numbers of the current cases that we have and the active warrants. We also pulled the data, and thanks to Court IT for pulling all of this data. We pulled the last 3 years, 2021, 22, 23, and then year to date for this year. Really what it comes down to is an average of about close to 1,200. And I'm going to use that number just because it helps me kind of divide things with my public education. It helps me divide it as to who gets what. So I'm going to call it 1,200 cases. Out of the 1,200 cases, about 900 would be filed in the 18th Judicial District. The other 300, less than that, but a little less than 300 would be filed in the 17th Judicial District. We broke it down to future court date filings as well. There's 618 currently domestic violence cases docketed with our court as we speak. We also provided the top charges for that we see in our court for domestic violence cases. Next slide, please. The assumed operational approach. One thing that we talked about with all of the people that came to the 2 meetings was what did we do with the current cases? And really, after talking with everybody and talking internally, the decision is, and the plan is that any case that is currently filed with our court, where they have come in contact with the police department, which means that it's not the probable cause people, but people that have actually come in contact with the police department. We know who they are, where they are. Those cases will remain with our court until final conclusion. And that means from when they first appear before the court, enter their not guilty plea, all the way through to final adjudication, if there's a conviction, all the way through to the end of probation. Really what that means for timing purposes, it's about anywhere from 12 months, because the mandatory term for domestic violence treatment is 12 months. It would be about 15 months. So I wanted to throw out that 15-month figure so that you have it in your mind when you're talking about how long it would take for the domestic violence cases that we currently have to make it through our system. It's about 15 months, really is for planning purposes. During this time, we will also, when I say we, the prosecution for our court will continue to review cases to see what they want to do with the cases that have warrants for them right now. So there'll be a consistent review, an ongoing review of those cases to see the feasibility and the possibility of prosecution of those warrants. There could be, potentially, with collaboration with both the 17th Judicial District, District Attorney's Office, and the 18th Judicial District, District Attorney's Office, the potential for refiling of the cases, but there's a lot that goes into that because they have to look at both the statute of limitation and the underlying facts of the case to see if there could be a refiling of those cases. So that's a lot of work that goes into those reviews to see if any of those cases could be transferred over to either the 18th or the 17th Judicial District. Next slide, please. This is the steps that we've taken so far. Again, we all met internally on the 8th. Letters sent to the DAs and other stakeholders to set up meetings. We held meetings on the 29th where we had about 30 people there, and everybody that you can think of that would be involved in the process was at that meeting. And then we held another meeting, a second meeting on the 1st. We followed up with those meetings to talk about the process internally, and then we have another meeting scheduled with the stakeholders with the potential of expanding the people, including people from state judicial. And what I mean by that is the probation department, leadership for state judicial, and other state judicial stakeholders at the meeting for the 29th. Next slide, please. At both meetings, both the meeting with the 30 people and then the subsequent meeting on the 1st, there was a request that they provide us, that we provide them, with the type of cases that we have in our court so they get an idea of workload for their offices, plus have an idea that the DV cases that we have with our court to see if there were any issues about their offices handling those cases. They requested 50 random domestic violence cases, which we will provide to them. We broke it down to the number of cases that end up on probation, which was about 80% of the cases were cases. That gives you an idea of the time that is needed. Next slide, please. A lot of meetings from, as you can imagine, from both the 17th and the 18th Judicial District. It was a consistent message from all parties for both. Was they really date, and it's for many different reasons. The DAs had concerns whether or not they would have enough prosecutors to handle the case, whether or not they had enough support staff to handle all of the cases. Judicial had concerns whether or not they would have enough judges and judicial staff to help with the added caseload that they would have. They both the 17th and 18th really stressed that they're already past their planning and budget process, because as you probably know that they're on the fiscal year from July 1 to the next period. So they've already gone through the 2024 into 2025 budget process. There was a lot of concern about the fact that the 18th Judicial District is changing, because there's going to be the creation of the 23rd Judicial District, so the 18th will become Arapahoe and Arapahoe only. You'll have a new DA within the 18th Judicial District. Both the new DA for the 23rd and the 18th will be sworn in and take office and everything effective for the 23rd on January 14th. So that was a big concern from those stakeholders. They indicated that the first time that they could request new judges, county judges, would be in 2025 for the planning process for the fiscal year starting July 1 of 2025 into 2026. That would be the first time that they could request county judges. Although it was pointed out that they do have the authority to bring on magistrates to handle any additional caseload, and that's both judicial districts. They've already pointed out that they're already understaffed, and that's why you see the bullet point that their current study shows that they're already in need of 2 additional county judges within the 18 Arapahoe County. They also had concerns about whether or not they had places to put new judges and new staff. We need to build new courtrooms, additional courtrooms, and so that was stressed by that group as well. Themselves available to engage with you. So I told them that themselves available to engage with you. So I told them that I would absolutely let you know. There were staffing concerns for the county jails as well, and the need to expand virtual appearances for both counties, both the 17th and 18th. We have virtual capability at our detention center right now. We have collaborated and worked with the 18th to where we hold daily hearings virtually for people that are in custody for the 18th. We haven't set it up yet with the 17th, but there's strong consideration from the 17th to get that set up as well for Adams County. They all believe that it's important that we do have a date when this will go into effect. And it was pointed out that by resolution, as it stands right now, it's currently set as January 1 of 2025. But just as Mayor Pro Tem indicated, that was the need to put it on paper for the resolution itself. But that's why we're having further discussions. So, next slide, please. As requested by the resolution, Council was looking for both pros and cons of the transition. We've listed some pros and cons that was offered by all parties during those meetings. You can see both. Any questions about any of those?
Councilmember Morgan.
Yeah, what is considered a lower level of violence?
It's a great question. There is a difference in the elements within a state prosecution versus elements for a municipal prosecution. Like, for instance, battery is the knowing or reckless use of force or violence against the person, which is different from assault within the 3rd degree, which needs to be bodily injury or the threat of bodily injury within the provision of the state statute. Solution, we would be prohibited from handling violence cases in our court.
Sorry, Mayor. But the difference is, you're saying if it was in our court, they couldn't transfer over, but they wouldn't be, because the way that we would structure is they just wouldn't be filed here going forward. So anything that's already filed in our courts, we would work through the system.
Yeah.
So that actually wouldn't be a problem, because at least even with the plan that you outlined, once it's in our system, There wouldn't be we're transferring. It would just be a stop charging new cases here and going forward.
Exactly. And so, I'm sorry I confused you with that. Anything that we currently have that finds its way to us before whatever date council picks as to the stop date of filing, we would keep. However, for cases where there's warrants for people, the prosecution would continue to review those cases to see if they want to, if there's still some viability of the prosecution of those cases within our court, or there's the potential to have them refiled with the state court based upon the facts and circumstances.
Councilmember Sundberg.
Thank you, sir. From my own understanding, on the pros side, I think there was some recent legislation passed, a bill that modeled the county DV system as the standard, right? Municipalities would model themselves after. So they're doing a great job in the state's mind at the county level with DV cases. And it wasn't the case in 2 or 3 years ago in which a state representative wanted to do this very thing?
Last year.
Was that just last year? And
1222 was the bill where at first when it was introduced was to remove domestic violence cases from municipal courts. And through
so just to highlight, our state legislator wanted to do this, right?
Right.
They wanted to do this. And when they wanted to do this, you're talking about the logistics of all of this in a former slide or two, with the staffing, the space, all of this. So when that was presented, did they present a type of plan written out for the logistical aspects of things?
No, they did not. And nor did they have a fiscal note to it. As I recall, I was involved in those discussions, as you can imagine, down at the Capitol, to where the bill ended up changing to where it was finally voted upon and passed. If I remember right, and again, I'd have to go back and look, I don't believe that there was a fiscal note bill as it was originally introduced, because there was a lot of stakeholding that took place from the point that it was introduced before the fiscal note analysis was prepared, if I remember right.
Mayor?
Yeah, Councilmember Jaworski.
So for me, the last screen and this screen, the travel requirements to district courts as a con, and then on the last screen that the counties are saying, that they're going to have to build a new courtroom and they don't have enough space. I was under the understanding that we were going to offer them satellite space in our court, so that wouldn't, so victims would still be traveling to our court, and that wouldn't be a budgetary concern for them to build a new courtroom and where they're going to have space.
It did come up. They asked about what we would do with our courtroom space. There was some, at least at a high level, some introduction of that concept. Nothing's been discussed through, but it was discussed at some point. That could be a possibility.
Councilor, do you have anything else?
No, go ahead.
So somebody's arrested and in failure to appear. And so it could be a long time before they're rearrested and found to have an outstanding warrant. And let's say it's a year out. What happens there in this transition, should it go forward?
Yeah, that's a really great question, Mayor, because you never know when you're going to come back in contact with that person. In fact, if you go back a few slides, when we listed the cases that were docketed, if you look at the very last year, I think there was a 2017 case, if I remember right. A couple more back, right there.
Oops, sorry.
Whoop. Actually, if you look at that, there's one case from 1987.
Wow. Oh, my God. Is there a statute of limitations on domestic violence?
Not for warrants, there's not. There's a processing time for both CBI, and they only keep cases open within their system for every 7 years, but you can renew that 7 years. That's where you're going to see some of the older cases, the 1994 case, the 1987 case, the 2001 case. So you're exactly right, Mayor. Does it happen? Yeah, I mean, I can show you it does happen, because there's 3 cases with this. That from the violation date, those 3 cases are still active within our court. So what do you do with those?
Yeah.
That would be left to the prosecution to decide whether or not they could continue to prosecute it if that's 5 years down the road. But if there's a cutoff and we follow the guidelines that's required by the state law, then we would always have to have, for all eternity, really, if you think about it, resources available to meet the requirements of the state statute. That includes probation, city attorneys, public defenders. Everybody's got to be available to prosecute those cases.
So we're stuck with all the failure to appear, potentially.
It would be left again to the prosecution to decide whether or not they were going to continue to prosecute that case or not.
Okay.
And they would have to look at the viability of whether or not they can prosecute that case. They have ethical obligations in doing so, whether or not they can prove it beyond a reasonable doubt. And the age of the case is absolutely going to be one of the considerations.
Councilman Bergen?
But isn't there a charge for failure to appear? Isn't there not a consequence for that in our court or any
All
court?
right, sure.
We have the charge of failure to appear on our books. The court issues a bench warrant every time somebody fails to appear. And so could they be charged with failure to appear under the specific provision of the city's code? They absolutely could. But
Right, so, I mean, that person probably will never find, but if we did, they would be charged with failure to appear plus.
Jack?
And let me nuance that a little bit, because our failure to appear was in 1987. We would have had to issue a warrant for that charge in no later than 364 days after their failure to appear. In other words, it's limited by statute of limitations.
statute of limitations on those cases.
Councilmember Lawson?
Yeah, Judge Day, so I appreciate all these numbers and stuff, but within this context, there's a human being and a victim. So my concern with this is a big transition. And I guess what the concern, I'm sure what I brought up in the first time we discussed this, is the victim, because sometimes it can mean life or death. And it just seems like, was this part of the discussion of how we can make sure no one is falling through the gaps here, the victims? Because like I said, this could be very serious in terms of life and death for a victim. So was that discussed? I see a bunch of numbers, I see what you guys are talking about, transition, but I don't really see that, and also a communication plan to victims about this transition should it go forward.
Sure. It absolutely was discussed at those meetings about victim impact and whether or not they would have the resources. When I say they, both judicial districts and the DA's offices, to properly handle those cases. And again, it was raised in our discussions about the concerns that both DA's offices had as they're currently staffed, and how they would be able to staff up to get to the point that they could ensure that the cases would be properly handled. But again, as we discussed, and they kept pointing out during those meetings, there was concerns about their staffing that they currently have.
Mayor Pro Tem?
They could get staffed up by the date that this is to take effect.
Wherein victims who are in current cases, especially really cases where, like I said, there is a potential of life and death situation. And I don't want to be a person on this council to be responsible for that because we're doing such a big transition. So I'm not saying that this is not, but I do have concerns still about that. I understand it's about staffing, but you're about to get a new DA, we're about to get a new district, all this stuff is happening, and so it just seems like it's a lot to put, and then have a victim navigate this.
Mayor Pro Tem?
Okay, so first I'm going to talk to that. The way that the plan you've outlined up here, the victims so people who are currently in the system would continue to stay, would not transition, correct? They would stay through the system, at least as it's envisioned here. So there wouldn't be any transition. The only people that this would affect are people who've yet to be victimized. So it would be future charges would no longer be filed in municipal court. At some point, we would say, and I'm just pretend, January 1st, 2025, we'd say no new charges. Anything that has happened prior would stay under the current system. Now, in talking to the DAs, they did share with me their concern about staffing, but it was primarily around prosecutors, court space. But when I asked them in terms of supporting victims, and part of remember, they do this for every other city in their jurisdiction already. They have more investigators, which is critical when it comes to domestic violence and having that first contact and connecting with victims. And they have more victims' rights advocates generally, just because they deal with this more. So from a victim standpoint, and this was with all due respect to our staff, I think the DAs are clearly as capable of handling these cases as our staff. So the question is, going forward, and I think there's a lot of benefits to the city of Aurora no longer handling these cases, of course, making sure that the people who are in the system until that cutoff date, whatever we determine it is, that there is a very clear path to ensure justice for the victims. But I think that moving forward, the benefits from a financial standpoint are significant because it gives us, our courts and all of us on council, when we look at other priorities that we have in the city, to utilize the resources that municipal taxpayers give to us to spend on those priorities. So I think that my suggestion would be, if there's support in making this transition, that we determine to do it, and then we have a date by which we want it to happen. And I know that there was a letter sent to us today requesting us to go until January of 2026. It was just brought up, it came to my attention that the fiscal year for the DAs is July through July. So they wouldn't be able to or make new requests until next year for July going forward. So maybe we look as that as a cutoff date is June 30th of 2025 and say at that point the city of Aurora will no longer charge in municipal court. And then I think that also would provide time between now and then the opportunity for stakeholders to really flush out what exactly is the plan to do it by that date and answer questions, as Councilmember Drensky brought up, around the satellite court, around, how do we transition? Because clearly there would be, prosecutors maybe in our office that would potentially go and work in the DA's office. So it would give more time for those conversations to be had. But I think the question that we should ask first before we continue this is, do we believe that it's the right policy, and I do, for the city of Aurora to stop charging domestic violence cases in municipal court and instead charge them to the county? And if so, what date?
Mayor?
Just one quick question. So we do misdemeanor cases, and the district court always does felony cases, right?
District court's felony level cases, county court's misdemeanor level cases.
Oh.
Our cases are misdemeanor type facts patterns
Okay.
that would fit into the county court prosecution. We've handled felony level charges within our court. We have over the years because
Okay.
it's been determined later on that there is serious bodily injury. So the long answer is district court does felonies, county court does misdemeanors.
We're going to have to wrap this up given time constraints, yeah. Councilmember Bergen.
I was just going to say, I think we should move forward. It's just a matter of, what's the right timing.
Mayor?
Councilmember Jones.
And for me, with all due respect to the respective counties, I don't think we've ever had one conversation that we were actually joking about this. So they knew this was coming. They knew this was coming, and now they're going to throw this Hail Mary to try and delay this. They knew that this was coming, and there are plenty of misdemeanor level domestic violences currently going to the county as is that have some sort of other felony charge associated. So we actually are sending misdemeanor DVs to the county right now as well.
Mayor Pro Tem,
Yeah, so I guess I would like to move this forward with a effective date of, and Jason, correct me if I'm wrong, if this is the right way to do it, but just to say we would direct city staff to no longer charge domestic violence cases in municipal court effective July 1st, 2025.
I think that's consistent with what we'd heard from the DVs, from the discussion groups, is they're looking for a decision to move forward or not, and they're looking for a date certain. I think that also, if you're saying July 1st, that provides time for them, and I think we can certainly go back to those groups. This was not intended to be the final plan. This was an update. We wanted to provide you all what we'd heard. We can take this guidance back and continue to refine that plan, and then come back to council.
we don't need an action item right now, or do we?
No,
We just need direction.
Yeah, so I would say, if I could, Mayor, say that the direction would be have that discussion. I'll bring forward a resolution that would have that date. And then the second date I would want is that council would be briefed by end of Q1 2025 on what that plan is going to be. So there's plenty of time to develop that plan to say by July 1st, the city will no longer charge them in municipal court, and here's the plan beforehand. So there's those two dates, and I'll bring forward a resolution to do it.
So we don't have to, there's no action that needs to be taken
I
tonight,
guess,
Councilmember
the other
Sandberg?
direction.
Well, just a real clarification real quick on the travel aspect of this. Very likely, we could have a satellite station here, and they would have a choice of where to go.
Obviously, that's going to be a conversation that we would have to have with both the 17th and 18th, what their needs would be, what their, whether or not they would want to have a satellite. So there's, just as the Mayor Pro Tem indicated, that would have to be part of the conversation as to where would those new courtrooms be? Would it be here? Would it be a satellite office? Would it be a reopening of, Aurora, which used to be back in the day, they had county court up there off of Colfax and Chambers. There was a county court division up there for many years. Those are discussions that we would have to have. One thing that I wanted to point out, because it relates to, I think, what you're talking about in the way of timing it and pushing it to the July 1 date. Candace and her team have some concerns about staffing and keeping staff on board, knowing that you're going to tell your team members that this is going to happen, and the attrition that can go with that, and have the ability to continue to monitor those cases from that July 1 date all the way for the next 15 months or so. We've discussed options that may be available for her and her team if we get to that point, but I can tell you, she wanted me, and I told her I would, highlight that concern for her.
Is there Councilmember Moreno?
Thank you. Can you remind me, is Arapahoe County aren't they going through a campaign this year to ask taxpayers for an increase, is that right?
They're going to make that decision later this month, but they've been discussing it.
That's the plan, right? Have we asked them about, I still don't agree that this is the right move, but I think I'm curious about, right, so they're going to ask the question, they're already feeling like there's a fiscal crunch, right? That's why they're asking to raise taxes. This would increase their costs. Do we have a sense of, how long it will take them to know, I don't know, just a readjust to how much, if the tax passes, how much time they would need? Is that 6 months enough time? Is what they're asking for from taxpayers going to also be able to cover this as well? Can somebody talk to me about that?
So we've met with primarily the stakeholders in the court system. I have a meeting set up next week, I think, with the counties, representatives from each of the commissioner's office to discuss exactly that. So I think one of the questions from the commissioner's office is going to be, what are the cost impacts to the county? And that's what we've started to do, is try and get the data so that we know what's the county share, what the state share, and then really move forward with that. So those conversations are ongoing, but we don't have the answers yet.
Gotcha. Just the point that I wanted to make is that we're talking about transitions. Even if you give 6 months or however many months from the date that they pass the tax, assuming that happens, it takes time. And I would just ask if there's any additional time to push that back. 6 months really for an organizational transition to already address their budget deficit. Now adding this additional budget deficit, I think is going to take more time than anybody probably anticipates. So I would ask to push this back to the January of the next year, or even the next fiscal year, but I understand that might not be your prerogative, but just to give them some additional budget or flexibility to balance their budget, you know?
Mayor Pro Tem?
Yeah, I appreciate the concern. I still think July 1st, but again, when there's additional conversations.
Okay.
But I think let's stick with July 1st for now, Because even if the other thing is the tax might not pass, right? And there's still, I still believe that it's in Aurora taxpayers' best interest. And I care about the county, and obviously Aurora taxpayers are mostly Arapahoe County taxpayers too, but our job is to focus on Aurora.
Well, I think what you're doing, what's going to occur then, the Mayor Pro Tem and others, like the judge, are going to have communications with judicial districts, both judicial districts, and then before a proposal comes forward. So we're not voting on a proposal tonight.
Yeah.
It was just discussion. So thank you. Then item number 5A, internal audit ordinance updates, and we've got to get through item number 5B too, so we need to be quick.
Yeah, I think this should be fairly quick. So it's just basically an update of the auditor's office to make sure that we're in compliance with the recent internal audit standards, the updates that came through. It also will give the M&F committee quarterly and annual updates, and also is subject to a peer review by a professional nonpartisan group. So really it's just formalizing the roles and responsibilities.
Okay. Michelle Crawford, do you have anything to add?
Yeah, so Michelle Crawford, City Auditor. So these are just updates to the ordinance incorporating leading practices, our audit standards, which we'll need to conform with in 2025 that were just changed. It just incorporates those things to address some of the independence questions, and then also making sure we're aligning with those best practices and standards, so.
Further, any questions, comments?
Mayor Gardner.
Councilmember Gardner.
Thank you. Yeah, I mean, obviously, we need to make these changes to comply with current best practices, but nothing in here eliminates the obvious conflict of interest of having the city auditor report to somebody who she is responsible for auditing. So while I'm not going to object to moving this forward because we do need to comply with best practices, we still have a significant conflict of interest present with who our city auditor reports to.
Further discussion? Seeing none, is there any objection to moving 5A forward? Seeing none, 5A will move forward. Okay, 5B, Mayor Pro Tem Savanek again.
Yep. So I know that we're running short on time, so I will go through kind of the highlights. First of all, the purpose of this resolution is to hopefully establish some sort of a legislative intent on how we would want city staff and the operator hired to run the Aurora Regional Navigation Campus going forward. And so this resolution establishes the Aurora Regional Navigation Campus as an alternative to the housing first approach, focusing on employment, treatment strategies to help individuals achieve self-sufficiency. The key features of the resolution are the three-tier system, with Tier 1 being low barrier shelter with basic services and safety measures, Tier 2 with semi-private congregate shelter for those engaging in job training and treatment programs, and then Tier 3 is the non-congregate shelter with private rooms for those meeting the work and recovery program criteria, all that laid out in the resolution. It lays out the fact that the governance would be structured where city council would oversee the operation, and we'd have the mayor and their designee be appointed to the operator's governing board. The operator would provide annual performance audits back to council. It would ensure that we have comprehensive services on the campus, a range of services including meals, showers, laundry, animal shelters, pet shelters, and then there would be the up to 20 rooms that in Tier 3 that would be designated for respite care, with healthcare providers offering the exams. And then there would be the annual performance audits that would be required, as I mentioned, back to council each year, that would include not just financial performance, but also meeting the job training, job attainment, and progress towards self-sufficiency. And in the resolution, just to be very clear, in the fifth whereas, we talk about self-sufficiency as being defined by utilizing the lowest level of public subsidies possible and producing self-support through employment. So again, this resolution is really to establish a legislative intent on how this is a significant investment on part of the city of Aurora, and it really is supposed to be a model. Hopefully, as many of us visited other cities, including San Antonio and Colorado Springs, it is very much my hope, and I know many of you share this, that there will come a day when people will visit Aurora because we have a successful model. a model that's not just putting people into housing and calling them housed, but is actually changing the plight of their life by helping them move to self-sufficiency with requirements to participate in recovery programs and in job training.
And I just want to say I'm going to be working with, mention to the Mayor Pro Tem that I'll be working with him on an amendment, because where it says a priority in Tier 3 goes to those working full-time, but it doesn't say what the, what the minimum standard is in Tier 3. And so I believe everybody should be working in Tier 3, and so it's a question of what is that, what constitutes work? Is it part-time? And what, and if so, how many hours? And so we'll be working on that. Yes.
Just a question of clarification. You have the goal of self-sufficiency, it says market rate independent living off campus. Is that feasible, you think? That within 2 years they're going to be making that much money?
To be
$60K?
in market rate, or say that again?
They're going to make 50 or 60K?
Or it could also be affordable housing, right? I mean,
Well, it
that's.
doesn't say that, that's what I was just
Yeah,
asking.
and so if we could change that, because that's part of it. It's that the idea would be, it could be market rate or affordable housing. The idea would be that they could be on their own, right? So I'd be happy to, that was an omission if that's not in that.
Good point. Good
Yeah.
point. Councilmember
That's
Mario.
a good point.
Is affordable housing not considered subsidized housing?
It doesn't say non-subsidized. It says to the lowest level possible. And if that's the lowest level possible at that time, then that's consistent.
Further questions or comments? Is there any objection to moving 5B forward?
I object.
Okay. Councilmember Murillo objects. Further objection? Councilmember Medina objects. Then item number 5B will move forward. Seeing no further business before the Aurora City Council, meeting is adjourned. We will reconvene at 6:30 on the floor.